Wyoming Territory, August 1883, the first time Zadie Hill's fiancé hit her, she told herself it was the whiskey. The second time, she told herself it was her fault. By the third, she knew better, but by then, the wedding was 6 days away. She stood on the porch of her father's weather-worn farmhouse, one hand pressed to the bruise beneath her collarbone, hidden beneath her dress. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the cottonwoods, casting long shadows over the dry yellow grass and the dirt road winding its way toward town. Dust rose in the distance. A rider was coming. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear. She stepped forward, squinting. The man rode a deep brown gelding, saddle worn but well cared for. He sat tall, broad shoulders under a faded blue shirt. He slowed as he reached the fence line, then dismounted with a smooth motion, dust clinging to his boots as he walked up the path. His hat came off as he reached the porch. "Even in, miss," he said, voice low and steady. "Is this the Hill place?" Zadie nodded, eyes locked on his face. He looked about 30, with sun-browned skin and a sharp jaw. His eyes were a steel gray, steady and kind. He did not look like a man who raised his hand to a woman. "It is," she said. "You looking for my father? He passed last spring." The man paused a moment, then nodded. "I am sorry to hear that. My name's Maddox Granger. He and my uncle used to run cattle together. I came through to see if there was anything left I could settle for him, but if he's gone—" She stepped down off the porch, brushing her hands on her apron. "There's nothing here but me now. Me and the house." Maddox's eyes lingered on her jaw. She tried to angle her face away, but he had already seen it. His voice dropped lower. "Who hit you?" Zadie's breath caught. "I fell," she said quickly. Too quickly, Maddox didn't say anything. He only looked at her, eyes not accusing but heavy with something else, pity maybe, or something deeper. She hated that it made her chest tighten. "You got someone to help you?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm set to be married in 6 days. He looked at her hand. "No ring." She pulled her fingers into the folds of her skirt. "It's his mother's. He keeps it with him." Maddox was quiet a long time, then he said, "What's his name?" "Eldon Price," she said. "He owns the feed store in town." A muscle jumped in Maddox's jaw. He looked out at the land, then back to her. "He do it more than once?" he asked. Zadie didn't answer. She did not have to. Maddox looked like he wanted to say 10 different things, but instead he nodded once and stepped back. "I'll be in town for a few days. If you need anything, you find me." "I'll be staying above the saloon." She did not answer, just watched him tip his hat, mount up, and ride off. That night, Eldon came by. He was angry she had left the curtains open. Angry there was no stew on the stove. Angry she had spoken to a stranger. His slap came hard and fast, knocking her backward into the kitchen table. Her shoulder thudded against the edge. She bit her tongue to keep from crying out. "You think you're too good for me," he hissed. "You think anyone else would want a girl like you? Your father gone, your land dried up, nothing but a pretty face and a sharp mouth." She stared up at him, and for the first time she did not feel fear. She felt cold. "I think I would rather die alone than be your wife," she said, his fist clenched, but he stopped short. Maybe he saw something in her eyes. Or maybe he remembered Maddox Granger, the cowboy who had looked at her like she mattered. Eldon left in a storm of curses. The next morning, Zadie packed a small satchel. She left the house before the sun had fully risen, walking barefoot down the dirt road until her feet bled. Her boots swung from her hand. She did not stop until she reached town. The saloon was quiet in the early hour. She climbed the stairs and knocked on the door at the end of the hall. It opened slow. Maddox stood shirtless, hair damp from a wash, a towel slung over one shoulder. His surprise turned to concern the moment he saw her. "I need help," she said. He stepped aside without a word. Inside, she sat down on a wooden chair near the window. Her hands trembled. "I called off the wedding," she said. "I told him I was done." Maddox crossed the room, pulled on a shirt, and sat on the edge of the bed facing her. "He will not take that well," Maddox said. "I know." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You got somewhere to go?" "No." He looked at her, long and steady. "Then you stay here, until we figure something out." Zadie looked up at him. Why are you being kind to me?" His voice was soft now. "Because I have seen what men like him do, and I have seen what it costs. You deserve better." That night, she slept in Maddox's bed while he took the floor. He gave her the extra blanket without asking. She woke once in the dark. He was sitting near the window, watching the street. "You do not have to protect me," she whispered. He looked over, eyes meeting hers across the moonlight. "I want to." The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. Maddox helped her sell off her father's old tools, bartered for flour and coffee. He fixed the back porch steps she had been too afraid to use. He taught her how to ride better, taking her out past the river where the air was clean and the grass still green. They did not talk about Eldon. But on the 5th morning, Maddox found a note pinned to the saloon door. "Your whore's time is up. Wedding's back on. She comes home or I come for her." Zadie read it with shaking hands. Maddox took it from her gently. "I am not going to let him touch you again," he said. She looked up at him, and something in her chest broke open. "I am scared," she said. He stepped closer. "I know," he said. "But you are not alone." Then he did something she did not expect. He dropped to one knee. Zadie's breath caught. "I do not have a ring," he said. "And I do not have a house, but I have a horse and 2 strong hands and a heart that is already yours. Let me take care of you. Let me be the man he never was." Tears filled her eyes. She reached down, touched his cheek. "Ask me again," she whispered. He looked up, eyes full of fire and gentleness. "Zadie Hill," he said. "Will you marry me?" She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Maddox Granger. I will." Zadie sat beside Maddox on the edge of a creek that curled through an open patch of Wyoming grassland, its water slow and clear beneath the late summer sun. Her skirts were damp at the hem where she'd waded in, and her bonnet lay forgotten in the grass behind her. Maddox was quiet, whittling a slender length of pine with a small knife, the shavings falling like curls into his lap. A dragonfly skimmed the surface of the water. "What was your mother like?" she asked, her voice low. He paused, blade still against wood. "She made quilts in winter and set traps for rabbits come spring. Raised 4 of us after Pa died in Kansas. No softness to her, but she kept us fed and upright." Zadie nodded, then traced a pebble with her fingertip. "Mine used to sing when she cooked, always off-key, always loud. Didn't matter if we had guests or not." Maddox gave a soft breath, almost a laugh. "You sing only when no one's listening." He set the carving aside, now shaped like a bird mid-flight. "I'd listen." She turned her face away, not to hide, but to breathe. The world had begun to feel different, less like something she had to endure and more like something she could shape with her own hands. Back in town, word had started to curl through the streets like smoke. Strangers asked questions in hushed voices. Eldon had not been seen in 3 days, but his brothers still came into the saloon at dusk. They watched Maddox too long, too cold. Zadie noticed the shift in Maddox's gait the next morning. He favored his right leg as he came down the stairs, his left boot caked in drying blood. "What happened?" she asked, taking his arm without waiting for permission. "Just a scrape," he said, brushing it off. "From what?" He glanced toward the window. "Price's older brother caught me in the alley behind the stables, didn't say much, just swung." Zadie sat down slowly. "He'll keep coming." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "You don't have to stay." "I asked you to marry me, Zadie. That doesn't end when things get hard." She lifted her eyes to his. "I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me. I'd rather bleed than watch you go back to him." They were silent for a while. Outside, the wind carried the scent of hay and horses, and the sound of a bell rang faintly from the church across the way. "Do you believe in God?" she asked then. "I believe in the things that keep people standing when there's no reason left to." "Like what?" He looked at her, not blinking. "You." Her chest ached at that, but it wasn't a painful ache, it was full. Later that day, she found the old schoolhouse on the edge of town, shuttered and weathered. A place she'd passed often but never entered. She walked through its doors, dust rising underfoot, and ran her hand along the blackboard, still bearing the faint ghost of a child's handwriting. That evening she mentioned it to Maddox over a supper of beans and bread. There's a need, she said. No one's teaching letters out here, not since the preacher's wife left. He leaned back in his chair. You do it? I want to. His gaze held hers. What do you need? Not much. A table. Some chalk, and for folks to believe I'm worth trusting. They will, he said. If they don't, I'll make sure they do. That night, she stepped out onto the porch of the boarding house where they'd rented a room together until the wedding could be arranged. The moon lit the street in silver. Maddox joined her, carrying the blanket she always forgot to bring. We'll need land, she said, wrapping it around her shoulders. A place for a house. There's a parcel west of the river, he said. Belongs to no one. I could stake claim. We'll need lumber. I'll cut it myself. She looked at him then, truly looked all that quiet strength, the steadiness of his hands, the way he waited for her to speak without ever trying to fill the silence. I want you to kiss me, she said. He stepped closer. You sure? She nodded. I've never been more certain. His hand came up slowly, fingers brushing her cheek, and then he kissed her gentle, sure, and warm, like the first light of morning on cold skin. She didn't cry. There was no need. The wind shifted, and somewhere in the darkness an owl called out. She rested her forehead against his chest, and for the first time in her life she felt what it meant to be safe, not hidden. Not silent. Safe. They married on a Tuesday beneath a cottonwood tree just outside the schoolhouse. No preacher, just a circuit rider named Lamb who'd been passing through on his way north. He spoke slow, hands worn from reins and scripture, and asked only once if they were sure. Maddox looked at her like nothing else existed. Yes, he said. Zadie's voice didn't tremble. Yes. A few families came, mostly women with children and old men who remembered her father's name. They brought bread wrapped in cloth and jars of late raspberries. Someone played a fiddle, thin and sweet, and the wind picked up just enough to lift her veil, the plain white scarf she'd sewn herself from muslin. After, Maddox walked her home what was left of it. The house had sagged through spring rains, but the front room held. He'd cleared space, swept the floor, and brought a mattress up from town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Inside, she turned to face him. I never thought I'd marry again. You didn't, he said. You married for the first time. She touched the buttons of his shirt with quiet fingers. I want to know what it's like to be loved without fear. He took her hand in both of his and kissed her wrist, just once. Then we'll learn it slow. They built their days steady after that. Maddox rose before dawn and rode west to mark the land he intended to claim. He'd found a stretch near the foothills pine to one side, open range to the other. By winter, he said, there'd be enough cut to lay a proper frame. Zadie stayed in town for now, teaching letters in the schoolhouse. The children came shy at first, some barely speaking, others with hands too calloused for pencils. She taught them names, places, how to hold a line straight. At noon, she'd open the door and let the breeze in while they ate bread and smoked meat from home. One girl brought a bird's nest once, tucked in a bonnet. Zadie let her place it on the sill. Maddox watched her once through the window, unseen. The way she leaned close to help a boy trace his name, how she smiled when he got it right. He didn't interrupt. He just leaned against the hitch rail, arms folded, and waited until class let out. Was I that proud when I learned to write? He asked as they walked back. You still write like a man chasing a horse, she said, and he laughed. They didn't speak of Eldon. Not until the sheriff found Maddox one evening, oil lantern in hand. Price's body turned up, he said at the edge of the saloon, voice hushed. North Fork of the river, shot once in the gut, then left. Maddox didn't flinch. You think I did it? I think half this town does, the sheriff said. But I also know you've been seen building fence every morning before sunup, and she's been teaching school, so unless you're faster than a rifle and twice as clever, I'd say it wasn't you. I didn't touch him, Maddox said. The sheriff nodded once. Still, you'll want to keep close. Folks carry long memories in towns like this. When Maddox told Zadie later, her face went still. She didn't cry. She sat down, hands folded in her lap, and stared at the grain of the table for a long time. He was always going to end ugly, she said. I just didn't think it'd be this soon. He kneeled beside her, resting a hand on her knee. "You don't owe him anything," he said. "I don't feel sorry." Her voice was flat. "I thought I might, but I don't." Maddox nodded. "That's nothing to be ashamed of." She reached out, touched his hair, then let her hand drift to his cheek. "If they come looking at you sideways, I'll stand in front." He smiled, not wide, just enough for her to see the truth in it. "You already do." By October, the first snow came light and slow, clinging to fence posts and rooftops like flour. Maddox moved them out to the land he'd claimed just a lean-to and a stove for now, but enough to keep warm. He brought her a stray hound one morning, thin and gray-eyed, left behind by someone headed west. "He's got no name," Maddox said. "I thought maybe we'd give him one." "Call him Chance," Zadie said, rubbing the dog's ears. "Seems like he took one." They spent evenings by the fire, boots off, her head on his shoulder, his hand curled around hers. He read aloud sometimes, slow and careful, from the old Bible her father had left behind, not for preaching, just for the quiet of it. Psalms, mostly, the ones that sounded like wind through grass. One night she asked, "What made you stop riding?" He didn't answer for a while. "Then I saw too many graves with no names on the markers. Towns forget fast." "I didn't want to be forgotten." "You won't be." He looked over, eyes catching the firelight. "Neither will you." In spring, she planted beans beside the cabin. He dug a well by hand. The wind carried birdsong again, and the sky softened. And in the hush of a morning not unlike the one they first met, Zadie woke to the sound of Maddox splitting kindling, the dog asleep at the foot of the bed. Her hand rested over the growing rise beneath her nightdress. It was still early. She hadn't told him yet she would that evening. She would look across the table, take his hand, and say, "I think we'll need a second chair for the schoolhouse." And he would understand. The first storm of spring came without warning. It swept in from the west, wild and spiteful, breaking branches and rattling the window panes of the cabin Maddox had built by hand. Rain lashed the roof in sheets, and the dog growled low from his place near the hearth, ears twitching. Zadie sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a bundle of wool scraps donated by a rancher's widow. She was teaching the older children how to sew their own mittens for next winter, and the pieces needed cutting and paring. Her belly had begun to swell just enough to strain the seams of her dress when she leaned forward. Maddox came through the door with his coat dripping, shoulders dusted with pine needles. He hung the garment on the peg nearest the stove and ran a hand through his wet hair. "Creek's risen near a foot," he said. "Roots are holding, though, no sign of washout," she nodded, holding up two scraps. "Which looks more like sky to you, this blue or the duller one?" He crouched beside her, studying the cloth. "That one," he said, tapping the paler piece. "Like morning before the sun climbs." She tucked it beside its match and set the rest aside for the next day's lesson. "How's the mare?" "Restless. She keeps nosing the barn door. I think she hears the coyotes again." Zadie reached for the kettle, refilling their mugs with warm chicory. "I heard them last night, too, just beyond the fence." He took the cup from her hands and sat back against the wall beside her. The fire crackled low, casting long, quiet shadows over the room. "You ever miss the road?" she asked after a while. "The moving, the riding, not staying too long in one place." His eyes rested on her face. "I never stayed long because I didn't have anything waiting for me anywhere. Now I do." She sipped her drink, the warmth coating her throat. "I used to think stillness meant being trapped. But now I think it just means knowing where you belong." Maddox reached for her free hand, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. "You've made this place more than land and woods, Zadie. You made it home." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice almost a whisper. "I dreamed last night that the baby had your eyes." He stilled, then turned slightly, close enough to see the worry she hadn't spoken yet. "Was something wrong in the dream?" "No, it was quiet. We were sitting by the river, just watching the water. But I woke up with tears in my throat." He rubbed his thumb across her knuckles. "You think it's fear?" "I think it's everything," she said. "Joy, fear, the weight of being trusted by someone who hasn't even taken a breath yet." He didn't answer right away. Then soft, When Pa died, my ma said the hardest thing was knowing there'd be no one to teach us what was right. She carried that alone. You don't have to carry it alone, she said. Not this time. They sat like that until the storm softened, the rain thinning to a patter on the roof. The fire burned low, casting flickers across the floorboards he'd laid one plank at a time. Maddox stood and took the lantern from the hook. Come morning, I'll ride to the sawmill. We'll need more boards if we're adding a room. Zadie looked up at him. You're sure? I want the child to have a space that's theirs from the start, not just borrowed corners. She rose slowly, hand resting on her belly. And what would you want to teach them first? He looked at her, eyes steady. How to be gentle with their strength. And how to hold on to kindness, even when the world offers none. She smiled, not from amusement, but from something deeper that settled under her ribs and stayed. Then they'll learn well. That night, long after the lantern had been turned down and the dog curled asleep near the ashes, Zadie woke to the sound of Maddox whispering. He was speaking to her belly, low and rough, as if afraid of disturbing even the dust. I'll be better than I was taught, he said, and I'll be here, always. She didn't speak, just reached out and touched his back, her hand resting there until he settled beside her again. In the hush that followed, the storm passed fully, and the first steady quiet of spring settled over their home. By early June, the wind carried the smell of wild sage and the low hum of bees settling into the clover. The new room had risen board by board, and with each nail driven, Maddox's shoulders bore a little more purpose and a little less haste. The roof had gone on last week, and Zadie spent afternoons sewing a curtain for the window, the fabric dyed soft yellow with onion skins and dried sunflower petals. On the morning the baby came, she was tending the garden rows barefoot, soil cool under her soles. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when the first pain caught her low and deep, different than anything she'd felt before. She didn't cry out. She straightened slowly, pressed one hand to her belly and looked toward the cabin. Maddox was already coming toward her, a bundle of fencing wire under one arm. He dropped it the second he saw her face. It's starting, she said. He didn't ask how long. He just wrapped his coat around her shoulders and led her inside, his hand steady on her spine. They'd already made plans with Mabel Donahue, a midwife who lived near the Mill Creek, known for delivering babies with hands like river stones, and a voice that could calm a skittish mare. Maddox saddled the gelding and rode hard, leaving the dog at the door with instructions to watch. By the time Mabel arrived, Zadie was kneeling beside the bed, sweat on her brow, teeth clenched. Maddox paced outside for hours, chopping wood that didn't need chopping. The dog stayed close, ears low, as if waiting too. When the cry came, sharp and high, Maddox froze with the axe mid-air. Then he dropped it and ran. Mabel met him at the door, her apron stained and her hair damp. She didn't speak, just stepped aside. Zadie lay in the bed, hair clinging to her cheeks, eyes glistening with exhaustion and something deeper. In her arms, swaddled in a blanket she'd stitched from old flour sacks, was a boy. Maddox approached slow, as if afraid to break the moment. Zadie looked up at him, smiling in a way he hadn't seen before, not wide, not bright, but full of something too rich to name. Come meet your son, she said. He sat beside her, brushing a finger over the child's cheek. The boy yawned silently, then curled tighter against Zadie's chest. He's got your mouth, she whispered. Maddox leaned in and kissed her forehead. He's got your heart. They named him Emily for no reason other than it felt right when they said it aloud. That night, after Mabel had taken her leave and the cabin had gone quiet save for the creak of the rocking chair, Maddox held his son against his chest. Zadie watched from the bed, her hand resting over her middle, now empty but still full with the ache of all they'd become. I didn't know I could feel this still, Maddox said, voice low. Zadie didn't answer. She just reached for him and he came willingly, resting beside her as the baby sighed in sleep between them. The seasons passed in their quiet rhythm. Summer brought new students to the schoolhouse, and Zadie returned to teaching with Ellie swaddled in a sling across her front. Maddox built benches for the children, and a shelf for the small collection of books she'd gathered from passing tradesmen and rancher widows. Their home grew with them. By the time Ellie was walking, there was a second fenced garden, a henhouse, and a small porch where Maddox often sat in the evenings, Ellie on his lap, Zadie beside them with her mending. The town softened too. Folks who once looked sideways at Maddox now tipped their hats when he passed. The sheriff, older now and more bent at the waist, brought them smoked trout in winter and coffee beans when the train delivered them. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky and the scent of cut hay drifted from a neighbor's field, Maddox turned to Zadie on the porch. "Think we've done right?" he asked. She looked out over the land where Ellie chased the dog near the woodpile, laughter carrying light on the breeze. "We've done more than right," she said. "We've made something that lasts." Maddox reached for her hand, calloused fingers folding over hers. "I'd marry you again tomorrow if I could," he said. "You can," she said. "But you'll have to ask proper this time." So he did on one knee just like before, though this time with a ring he'd carved himself, a simple band of polished cottonwood, worn smooth from weeks of turning it in his pocket. She said yes again, laughing through tears. And that night, as Ellie slept beneath a quilt stitched from the fabric of their beginning, Zadie and Maddox stood at the edge of their land, stars rising one by one in the hush of Wyoming dark, and knew without question, without fear, that they were exactly where they were always meant to be. Together, always.